Patti Girardi. I'm an instructor for IMC 613, Brand Equity Management. Awesome course. I have a feeling there's probably some students in here that I've had that I don't know about. Raise your hands. Yeah, hi guys, welcome. Hi Nick. Hi there. So we're going to have a really great time in this session. In my other job, the other part of my professional life, I head up the higher education division of Chartwell's, which is a food service provider to about 270 colleges and universities nationwide. We're actually a division of Compass Group, which is the largest food service provider in the world. And what we do is we install beautiful food courts like the one that you see on campus here, and we operate all-you-can-eat dining establishments as well as provide catering services. And what is so fascinating about our business right now is that half of our guests are millennials and half of our guests are Generation Z, which is a very interesting marketing challenge. So what I'm going to do today is, number one, emphasize that Generation Z are not millennials. And you're going to hear it all the time. I'm sure you do hear it now. People refer to kids these days as millennials. Well, guess what? The millennials aren't kids anymore. So what I want to do, just to get everybody on the same page, just to make everything really clear, is I'm going to start just by going through a handful of slides about millennials. Nothing particularly controversial in here, probably stuff that you already know, but just give us a base, and then we're going to contrast and compare from there. So, also known as Generation Y, millennials. Born 1980 to 1995. Of course, this varies depending upon the research source or the thought leader that you're studying in terms of the actual boundaries. But generally speaking, millennials are now 20 to 35. So I present to you that they are not really kids. But obviously, there is a romance with this group because it is 25% of the population. Many of you are millennials, and you yield spending power of about $1.7 trillion, which is an unbelievable number. So everyone wants a piece of you. And generally speaking, we describe this group as being very optimistic. And in fact, about half of millennials feel that the country's best days are ahead of them. Versus 42% for Generation X, which is my generation, and 44% for baby boomers. So the facts kind of support this. Now, why are they so optimistic? Generally speaking, we describe this group as getting a lot of good positive attention at home. So about 85%, which is an enormous number, identify one or both parents as their best friends. So that's pretty cool. And because they're used to getting so much attention at home and otherwise, they really value freedom and choice and customization and personalization, and there is in fact a great expectation that brands are going to cater to their needs. And there you are, looking at an image right now of just that, of Coca-Cola catering to the personalization demands of the millennial generation. They are values driven. In fact, about half of them actually say that they purchase products from companies that support social causes that they care about. And 70% buy less bottled water out of concern for the material's impact on the environment. So the beliefs are starting to manifest themselves in purchase behavior, which was not always the case. And they are more diverse than the population, than the general population, have a high tolerance for diverse backgrounds. 43% are non-Caucasian. And then finally, of course, no description of any generation these days would be complete without a comment about technology. And of course, the millennials are described as tech savvy, having really grown up with the internet, and the first generation to fully accept social media. But I say tech savvy. I don't say tech innate. I don't say tech natured, because it's the group that we're here to talk about today that is the real techie generation. So before I move on to the topic at hand, anybody have any questions or comments about the millennial generation? Okay, good. We're all on the same page. So Generation Z, born 1995 to 2010. They are 5 to 20 years old now, which is crazy. They are now the largest population. So they are more than 25% of the population. And at that age, at the young age that they are, they command $44 billion in spending power. Why is that? It's because they pull in an average allowance of $16.90 per week. Wish I had that allowance when I was growing up, but I had to get a paper route. Anybody here have, you look like a pretty young audience in general, but does anybody have any Gen Z at home? Great, good, okay, good. We've got some real life examples here, living and breathing some of these characteristics. So some of this is going to sound very familiar to you guys. Okay. Now, unlike the millennials who grew up in a pretty positive time, one of the defining moments, of course, for Generation Z is living through 9/11 and the Great Recession. And because of this, there is a kind of a different, kind of a little bit of a different belief system that we'll get into. But also, in spite of the fact that they do command a nice amount of spending power, 1 in 4 still are living in poverty. So there's a real seriousness that we're going to explore. And it's really important to understand this as marketers, because we can really get into some trouble if we expect the same kinds of spending behaviors to continue with this group. They are focused and realistic. Many of them live with millennial siblings, and they've seen the struggle of the millennials and are resolved to do things differently. So that's really interesting. If you're a potential employer, that's especially interesting, because one thing that we talk about a lot, especially being part of a large organization, is we can't wait for them to get into the workforce, because they really want to work. They really want to bring home. They are diverse. They are diverse in a way that the millennial generation is appreciative of, but not comprised of. Since the year 2000, there's been a 50% increase in multiracial youth. So this is an audience that really truly has the diversity ingrained in it, in its DNA, versus an appreciation for different backgrounds and representation of different backgrounds. And they are excruciatingly concerned about the health of the planet. If you think Gen Y, and I know we've got a lot of you in here, so, but you know, we care about the planet. These guys, 76% of them wake up every day actively thinking and worrying about man's impact on the planet. 26% of 16 to 19-year-olds volunteer. It's a really nice statistic. They are determined to give back, to make an impact. And in fact, about 60% of them have already decided at their young age that they want to be in a job that makes an impact on the world. And that you can compare that to a statistic on the millennials of about 39%. So, so definitely a difference there. I'm sure you're kind of getting the feeling that in some ways this group is an extreme version of the millennials, and then in some cases they're actually quite opposite. So that's what we need to watch out for. Okay, I find this to be fascinating, and probably, aside from technology, probably one of the most important dynamics that's going on in the Generation Z household right now, which is that many of them are living with multiple generations. So grandparents have moved in, a lot of their millennial siblings have not moved out. They're getting less attention at home. So as a result, they've become quite independent and resourceful. And I'm sure somebody can tell me how they're getting their questions answered and finding their information. Right? We all know. It's coming from the internet. So that's an interesting dynamic. The other thing that is really defining about them is that they are, as a result of this, developing an appreciation for the wisdom of their elders and a respect for authority that's markedly different from their predecessors. So something to think about. As you might imagine, they are extremely worried about the economy. They are, in some cases, living with one parent who's lost a job, or both parents have lost a job. They are very much impacted by local violence. So school shootings, unrest in the world. There's an awareness of unrest in the world, but there's a hyper-awareness of violence in their local communities. And I'm sure you can imagine some of the unfortunate incidents that have transpired on school grounds. These are almost, they say, more impactful than even 9/11 for these guys. As a result of this, they are hyper interested in value, and they are saving their money. So I think it's going to be very interesting when they kind of get a little bit older and we know more about them and they're kind of on the radar. How much spending power will they have once they're really out there making money? But they're going to put you through, as a brand, they're going to put you through the ringer in terms of really proving out that you can deliver value to them. And because they are so incredibly good with the technology, they're going to expect you to be on point across all platforms. So marketers who are not ready for this are really going to be challenged. They are less active. I'm sure somebody can corroborate this, right? 51% of teenage boys say that gaming is their #1 source of entertainment. And this is kind of the fun part for me, being in the food business. We always looked at the millennial generation as a generation of foodies and more sophisticated palates, and especially international palates, and trying sushi for the first time at very young ages, things like that. And in fact, as an organization, we reinvented our dining program from the hot service line, which some of us will remember, and the salad bar, to a more interactive, engaging, dynamic model whereby our guests now, our college guests, shop from one station to the next and interact with our chefs, and it's much more interesting, and the variety is much more substantial. These guys are going to influence restaurant design to a degree that we can't even imagine. And it's going to be a challenge. I'll tell you why. Because number one, because of their fixation on value, they aren't necessarily as interested in going out as the millennials are. They're really interested in cooking at home, in learning how to cook. They're extremely interested in where their food comes from. Right? They're really, really interested in the local community, growing their own food even at this age, transparency around where the food's coming from, all the good stuff about non-GMO, like this really matters to this group. So that is really going to put pressure on the food industry, number one. Number two, they're always taking pictures of their food, right? They're constantly interacting with their food, in a way that if your food doesn't look good, it's going to be all over the internet. So, so this, again, the standards in terms of presentation are greatly heightened. Now, some of the movement within restaurants in particular toward collaborative tables and use of recycled materials, these are things that have all become very important to the millennial generation. They will continue. But the bar that's going to go up is around design and the selfie revolution. So if you think about this sort of constant loop of Generation Z taking a selfie, posting a selfie, commenting, and it just goes around and around and around in a way that it has not gone in generations. What does that mean? That means that your restaurant has to look good as a background for a selfie. So think about that. So that's actually starting to influence the way that we talk about restaurant design and how the actual dining environment looks. A couple other things. The expectations for international cuisine, and in particular international mashups that are authentic, is also going to be greatly heightened. And this is because of their experience, their home experience with different cultures in the same household and foods that represent different cultures. So, so this is something as well to keep in mind. And then finally, maybe a not so positive outcome of some of the dynamics that we talk about with this generation is that because food is really kind of self-reported as their main vice, and yet activity has gone down so much, we are starting to see diseases that are not things that we want to see in this generation. So so that's a good challenge for us. That's a good responsible thing that I think that you're going to see more and more food brands really kind of picking up that torch and saying that we need to provide better for you food because we have a responsibility to keep people healthy. So, okay. They've always had it, and what is, again, really a defining characteristic of this generation is that they do not differentiate between social media and the internet. I see a head nod. I see a very aggressive head nod. They don't. In fact, 44% of them say that they researched the schools that they're interested in attending. This is just college-bound high school seniors. Research the colleges that they're interested in through their social platforms, not through the university's webpage. And half of them use the comments on these social platforms to make a decision about whether or not they were going to apply to that institution. So this is a much more significant integration of technology into this group's lives, and I think it's really a tremendous challenge for us. They multitask across 5 screens, digital screens on average at a time, and this compares to an average of 2 for the millennial generation. So they're expecting to see the same thing across all of the platforms, and if you're not on digital, you're nothing to this group. Okay. Thought leaders like the Harvard School of Public Health have been doing a lot of research around the behaviors of this generation, and they've actually described it as lacking situational awareness because of the overly reliant behavior, reliance on devices. They've actually kind of talked a lot about this group being unable to give directions, and just generally unaware of their surroundings. One of the things that they really encourage brands who are looking to do well with this generation to do is to help promote one-on-one relationships. Because you've got, the relationships are not happening like this. They're happening like this, even if they're in the same room. So, you know, that's also something that we've got to keep in mind. And they communicate with images, unlike the millennial generation, which tends to rely more on kind of short sound bites, if you will, kind of text sound bites, things like that. You know, this is an extremely visual group. There's been a lot of speculation about why this is. I'll toss just a couple of things out there, but we can debate later, certainly. Some say it's because they are extremely paranoid about privacy. And so their perception is that if they're communicating in images, that's some kind of a code, and nobody's going to know what they're talking about, or at least their parents aren't going to know what they're talking about. Now, I've had some parents debate this with me and say, well, they just think that they're lazy and they don't want to write things out, and they know what they're talking about, so it doesn't matter. So I don't know. I think that would be a very interesting conversation to have over cocktails. Yes.
Yeah. An article where the fallout from the new, not new, but the car seats, now this generation has grown, because everyone's toting their babies and infants in these seats from the car to the grocery, to the restaurant, and they're never held. That the amount of physical contact one-on-one is...
That is really interesting. And it's funny because when you talk about that, that also makes me wonder. I didn't really say anything about Generation Alpha, which is 0 to 5. Well, when you're talking about that age and that kind of behavior, it makes you wonder what the outcome of that would be. Yeah. Yeah. But even more so, I would imagine. Yeah, very interesting. Any other comments? Yeah.
I had a question. When you were talking about how they're having conversations, obviously, with their cell phones while they're in the same room, and the brands that are most successful are the ones that are encouraging the one-on-one interactions. What are a couple of examples, or how are brands doing that well, or which ones are doing it well?
I'm actually going to show you a few case studies. That's part of the presentation, but I do want to comment on that though, because that's something that our company, we're actually rebranding. We're going through a rebrand. I really wish that I could share with you what that looks like, but I can't do that today. But we're actually rebranding around this notion because we believe firmly that food is a way to, because it brings people together, that that business is kind of uniquely qualified to help promote personal relationships. And then I'll just make one comment that'll kind of tee us up for the campaigns that we'll talk about, which is that generally speaking, brands that are engaging this audience are acting like a friend and not as a company. And I think that somehow there's some kind of a connection there. Yeah. And we'll get into more detail about that. Anything else? Right now?
Yeah. I was just going to comment on these emojis and this communicating with images. I just recently, I think yesterday or the day before, read an article about how kids or Gen Z or whatever are using these emojis to even communicate abuse. That they're in abusive relationships and that they're suffering abuse, and they're communicating that through these emojis and through these images, even on a serious note like that.
So that's part of the code. That's part of the thing that they're afraid to talk about in the open.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of plays right into that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, I was going to say it makes sense that they believe that visuals can't be translated the same way because they're the first generation to realize that they don't live under the guise of, Gen X believes, if I'm talking, nobody can record what I'm saying.
Exactly.
There's no way to analyze it. And most people realize that we've moved over to digital VoIP on most communication systems, so everything that is a soundbite or written is actually being scrubbed for data to target advertising and that, and they've grown up with that. So they know that, okay, we have to look at the next symbology to communicate to avoid the filters and algorithms that are going to target us?
All the evidence that I've seen seems to suggest that that's absolutely on target. Absolutely. There was oh, wow, this is great. Right, we'll just work this way. Yeah.
I'm curious, more and more is the children of this age, you said they have grown up and technology is innate, but at what age does it become their own technology? So, we see toddlers swipe right and they are swiping their parents' phones, but I've had friends get their children their own tablets at ages 2 and 3. Have we seen any kind of research that indicates what personal introduction to technology and ownership might translate into the marketplace?
I think you're talking about really the next generation, right? The 0 to 5 alpha, which is, everybody is saying watch out because they don't know, because it's pretty scary. I think we're talking about a group here that is, I wouldn't say balanced. I wouldn't say that they've been corrupted, but we're seeing signs that, some of the signs that we're talking about, imply that, the excessive technology is having, in part, a detrimental impact. But it's really alpha that I think we have to watch out for, because that is the group that is coming out of the womb with a cell phone in their hand. Yeah, definitely. Stacy.
I was just going to speak to what you talked about regarding colleges and how this generation in particular is making decisions, because I work in an independent school and we talked about this, and it's grades 5 through 12. And in our admissions office, what we're seeing more and more, and I'm a parent, so this makes me absolutely, it blows my mind, but what we're seeing more and more is that it is the children who are the decision makers in their education, not the parents. And I don't know whether that speaks to millennial parenting more than it speaks to the independence of this generation, or whether it speaks to the independence of this generation. As a millennial parent, there is no way I would let my child choose what high school or what grade school he or she attends, but it seems like we're seeing that trend. And so now it's not just that we're marketing our message to the parents, but we're finding that we're having to speak to 13-year-old girls that are basing their decisions on God knows what, it's frightening.
But I think some of that has to do with the independence, because I see that in terms of, if you look at again, going back to food, because that's where we're doing most of our industry work around this group is, the Gen Z child has an enormous influence over the menu at home, so that's a much smaller thing than education, clearly, but I guess the point is that that seems to not just be isolated to educational decisions, and this is only a hypothesis because I don't think we've answered it yet, but my hypothesis is that it has something to do with the fact that they are more independent, that they feel very smart, because they've had to go and look things up on their own, and they are very resourceful, and so there is a degree of confidence, even though it's not as optimistic as the millennial generation. I think that they feel that they know a lot because they've had to go and do their research. I think I'll take one more question. I think there was one more. Okay.
You mentioned the 51% of boys gaming.
Yeah.
One thing, I don't know if you're going to talk about it or not, is that the Generation Z, instead of having a myriad of things that they do, they pick one particular thing and they dive really deep on it.
Absolutely.
You'll see, for example, with gaming, that they go to conventions, they do cosplay, they look at comic books, etc., and it's all built off of that one interest. And that's what they focus on for years. It's not just grab one or three things in a myriad.
That's a seriousness. And there's no doubt about it. This kind of seriousness. They're very focused. They feel pressure to be good at things, and and then they don't mind hard work. So they'll go and they'll focus and they'll kind of put their time in. You had a question,
I
right?
just wanted to make a comment.
I think we have enough
I
time.
work
Yeah.
for WVU recruiting undergraduate students, so I'm just now getting acquainted with Generation Z. And one thing that I've noticed is because of the lack of social skill, the one-on-one social skills, they and their parents seem to be emphasizing more, like, what are they getting out of the education, not just in the classroom or extracurriculars, but like, is this an environment where they can build social skills? Like, the onus is now on us as universities to not only teach them the classes they need, but also to teach them how to be a person in a
that is exactly right. And all of the evidence, all the research suggests that marketers who stop referring to this whole group as one group and really latch onto that and figure out how to make that happen are really going to be the most effective brands out there for this audience. So good. Let's end on that, and then I'll take you through some more things, and then we'll have some more conversation. This is awesome. So they are used to constant advertising. Somebody said that up here, I think, in conjunction with the, with the image communication, and they're used to it. They don't mind it, but their patience, like the millennials, is short, and so they want you to be respectful of their time. And they are open to brand messages. However, they really are not open to the hard sell. So it's really the brands that are acting like friends and building trust that we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, that seem to really connect most effectively with this group. And if they're not sharing your brand, you just don't even exist. So if they're not sharing you, it's just time to check out, because that's really what it's all about for these guys. If they believe in what you're selling, they are all about it. So technology is an obvious example. If you are attached to a social cause that they really care about, they're really going to want to interact with you. But again, they're not really interested in a sell, they're interested in a story. So they expect you to entertain them. They expect you to build a relationship with them. They don't want to hear about your product attributes, and they don't really want to hear about the cold hard price, unless you're talking about value specifically, or you're the low priced game in town, and that's how you compete. If you're trying to be a brand that's developing a relationship and really capturing some of the major spending power, then you have to do more than just talk about your product. Okay. So just to kind of sum up some of the takeaways, as marketers, we want to remember this group is diverse. We need to depict them as diverse in our advertising, communicate across digital platforms, attach a social cause that they care about, talk about value, and one thing to really think about is, how does this impact the traditional definition of integrated marketing communications? Because there's a part of me, when we are taking a look at when we're watching our guests, it's a part of me that thinks that they're not even looking at anything printed. So maybe the definition of integrated marketing communications goes all digital with this group. Who knows? It's just a question. I'm throwing it out there. I think it's something to think about. Okay. But don't treat them like millennials. So we're going to go through a few campaigns. And now the first campaign isn't necessarily new, but there's some things about it that are extremely interesting and extremely effective in terms of latching onto this audience. This is going to be Evian water, and the babies are going to come out, and then we'll talk about this. Who's seen this ad before? YouTube? Okay, so some of you have seen it already. This is from 2013. The babies have been around for a long time. They're part of Evian's brand story. But the reason why I showed it is because this particular ad was part of a deliberate strategy to take the brand, which is a more kind of sophisticated brand, and make it youthful and really break through to this group. And a couple of things that are really important about how they did this was, of course, the personalization. So now the baby looks like the customer, the consumer, and you've got this sort of I'm famous thing that's kind of going on that plays into this whole selfie mentality and look at me. Second thing is that there was an app that was launched in conjunction with the ad, so you could actually see yourself as a baby. I actually didn't get a chance to download it. I actually read some reviews; they weren't so hot. So, but the fact that you kind of get the idea that that's a really important part of the campaign. Sure.
They did a brilliant job too, I think, when they brought the demographics together with like the Running Man or Walking Man, whatever those dances are for multiple generations. So
Exactly. It really appeals to a wide audience. Definitely. Okay, now I'm going to talk about beats, which is, dominant, right? Beats are, Beats rules this generation. So the Show Your Color campaign, let's watch and then we'll talk about it. Okay, who's seen that before, or at least familiar with the campaign? Okay, fewer of you, but okay, so let me just explain. So this was a campaign that encouraged its participants to submit a photograph, on a kind of a blank wall, and then you could go and you could actually pick your color beats, and then a word that describes you, and post that, and you could be entered into, drawings to win prizes that you couldn't buy. So you could appear in the chance to appear in a spot, things like that, meet celebrities. In conjunction with that, Beats was also pretty masterful and maybe even a little bit lucky because they did also employ a guerrilla marketing strategy in conjunction with the 2012 Olympics and sent customized headphones to some of the most popular athletes. And so those influencers also kind of got on the bandwagon and became part of the buzz around the brand. You saw the engagement statistics in the video, and it's just clear that this is now a brand that dominates the category. I'm going to show you one more video. This is Lay's, do us a flavor. You've probably all seen this in some form, depending upon what platform you spend the most time with. You've seen an adult version. I just want to show an example of the creative for its playful nature, because it is very playful. It is definitely very much in keeping with the tone, that makes sense to communicate with for this group, and then I'll make a few comments.
It's no surprise that as you come are yummy as can be. We're baking no cheeseburgers, no one will disagree. flavor.com.
Okay, so I'm sorry, you're probably going to hear this song in your head all night. I will too. But I like to play that because I think as we kind of walk through our world and looking at our freshmen and our sophomores, we are finding that the expectation is be a little friendlier to us. Let's be playful. Let's have fun. It's a much less serious message in terms of advertising, right? I mean, we're still dealing with a serious group, but just in terms of how we're communicating, the expectation is we're going to be more playful. So I think that's a good example of it. Of course, the user generated content piece is also very much on fleek with this group. Of course, there's always a lot of debate about that because Lay's got lots of submissions that perhaps that brand's not going to talk about, orange juice and toothpaste flavors, things like that. There's kind of a little bit of chatter in terms of how successful is that campaign in total. But I think the characteristics of the advertising are worth mentioning, and user-generated strategies done correctly work with this group. So something else to remember. And one more brand that must be talked about in conjunction with this group is Taco Bell. First to Vine, first to Periscope, first to Snapchat. This is a brand that has dedicated itself to being a friend to this audience. I mean, that really is the strategy with Taco Bell. So, an example here, in terms of, again, the personalization effect, the Snapchat story, with an opportunity to customize your Valentine and send it. And, we're not asking you to do anything, even though our product's pictured, we just want to be your friend. So, another strategy, again, that is very much in tune with this generation. So those are my formal slides, and I would love to continue the conversation if there are other comments or questions. Yeah.
I taught a 200-level ad strategies class last year, and I'm so glad you picked Beats because that was the divisive product. It was not. I had a non-traditional mix of students as well as 18, 19, 20, and the non-traditional students were adamant. You're not paying that amount of money for a set of headphones, but the younger students loved them because of the personalization, the customization, the problem solution, and that it was built out of an entrepreneurial spirit. And so they were willing to invest the initial upfront cost because the idea was they'll have long-term value over time.
Exactly.
So thank you for using that example because I really, as soon as you said it, I even mentioned, I said, oh, that was so divisive for my students. And you could really, the generation gap was so apparent in that moment between the traditional students who were right on that cusp of being millennial Generation Z and the older students who were maybe even a little bit of X. And so it really was that value-added issue. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned a bunch of campaigns here that were really successful. Do you have any examples of something that really didn't work? That hasn't gone well?
Let's see. That's a really good. That's such a good question. I think someone wants to jump in. Are you okay? I'm going to let her jump in. The question is examples of campaigns that have not gone well with this group. And I thought someone wanted to jump in, so I'm going to let you jump in. Yeah. Yeah.
Or some fitness company, I can't remember who it was, but they were putting out billboards, that were intended to be, it's important to be fit, but people interpreted it as fat shaming, and it completely backfired on them, and I think it was predominantly the people in this age group.
And another thing, too, that's kind of a hot button with these guys is, even though I don't have an example of a brand at my fingertips, but just generally speaking, brands that make claims about sustainability and other social causes and don't back them up tend to experience a tremendous amount of backlash, because this group will really call them to task on that. So I mean, that's
Hashtag race together is a perfect
perfect example. Thank you.
really back
Yeah, perfect.
What was the example?
This-
Hashtag race together by
Starbucks. Yeah.
Or let's race together. Yeah.
Victoria's Secret had the perfect body.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's a great example.
We can't hear back here. What was this again?
The Victoria's Secret. Yeah. Yeah.
Or also like brands that are trying to go the angle like what we talked about with Taco Bell, that it's like, you know, they're cool and they're your friend. Denny's had got huge backlash over a tweet that they tweeted, and I read it and I didn't even know what it meant. But it was like some quote from some rap song, and it talked about like flippa de grits or something like that, about like talking about Denny's and their breakfast, but it was like a quote from a popular rap song, and people were just like outraged over it because the older generation was like, I don't even understand what that means, what are you doing? And then the younger generation was like, Denny's doesn't align themselves.
It wasn't credible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't credible.
Yeah, Denny's doesn't really align themselves with that generation, so why were they doing something that was so out of character?
I think that's right. That really speaks to the authenticity, because I really didn't go through that in a lot of detail, but I mean that's a buzzword that you're going to see continuously as you read more and more about it, is they really expect you to be authentic, and that's an excellent example of how perhaps that behavior wasn't authentic and they really suffered because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree on points like how J. Crew and the Gap were struggling, where companies like Uniqlo and Zara and H&M to some extent are really taking off because they're just appealing to that this here and now.
Exactly.
You know, clothing sustainability model.
Exactly right.
In the store every day.
Yeah, because Old Navy is now doing extremely well, and Banana Republic, you know, I think it's part of the Gap family, I believe, but also not doing so hot. Yeah, really stale.
I have a question of sort of a different angle. I've seen over the last couple of months some tweets, and your comment brought this to mind. There was one tweet, I think, from Pizza Hut during the Super Bowl about ovens, and it was timed near a mention of the Holocaust, and people were horrified. And there was a marketing firm that called themselves Strange Fruit, and there was a huge reaction because people could not believe that a PR firm would call themselves Strange Fruit without understanding the meaning of it. But a lot of the backlash also gets involved in how much history, context this younger generation has. So how does Generation Z react to, unfortunately, you know, some of these references to terrible things like, you know, American lynchings of African Americans, the Holocaust, that just might not be as much a part of their consciousness, but it really should be.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a reality. There's no question about it. I mean, we take for granted experiences that have shaped our point of view that they may have never heard of, sadly. So I mean that's definitely a reality.
Or just going off of that, jumping in on conversations, brands that jump in on conversations on social media to try and be relevant when they don't understand what they're talking about. I can't remember which pizza company it was, but there was one that jumped on the why I stayed versus DiGiorno, yeah, and it was like why I stayed because he had pizza or something like that, and got a ton of backlash from that.
Yep.
So it's like
Bud Light.
trying to be, the Bud Light, like, you know, taking no,
out of your vocabulary.
and like, things that they're trying to like jump in on the trends to be cool without fully understanding what is going on. Like, just because it's a trending topic doesn't mean your brand has a place in joining the conversation.
Exactly. I know you've had your hand up for a while.
I think one brand I would like to see move through this generation and see how they do well, because I think they made a shift that you wouldn't expect, or you wouldn't think that they would even survive. Is like Motel 6. They're leaving the light on.
Yeah.
They had such a, you know, even for Gen X, had such kind of a dated view. You're like, okay, how are they going to transition into digital media and everything else? And they just took they kept everything that was iconic for them and poked fun at their ageism. They're like, we're trying it, we're not good at it, you know, this is who we are. But much like in that essence, much like a grandparent would be trying to do it with the next generation. So as we go to Gen Alpha, it will be interesting to see how that brand ever survives.
But they're genuine, and it can be done. And actually, it's funny because I just didn't have time to put it in, but I saw the Kohl's, one of the new Kohl's ads this morning, and I thought, oh, I should put that in. Anybody seen the latest Kohl's advertising? Which, okay, you wouldn't, I mean, it's extremely, I mean, talk about a song that'll stay in your head all day, but very much aligned with the brand. Keep an eye out for it, or Google, you know, or go to YouTube. Kohl's is doing a really interesting job of shifting what, you know, is a really stale brand to a much hipper persona, like in a pretty authentic way, I think.
It's mirroring what Penny's tried to do a few years ago.
Except they're doing it well. Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if Penny's had their timing wrong because in and of itself it wasn't, you know what I mean, it just didn't hit.
Exactly.
It was like there might have been a half a shade ahead or what, but I'm wondering, is it somewhat similar?
I think it's a lot hipper. Yeah, check it out for sure. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it.
But do you think that there's connection with the multi-generational living quarters? That they're endeared to something that's old, something that's
I do.
That's whatever, antique or whatever, you know, because of that living situation.
I absolutely do. I think that they do have an appreciation, and I hope that, to your point, that they will learn more about history that will inform them. Because I do. I think other than technology, I think that is really the most defining experience for them. I know you've been trying to get into. Yeah.
One observation I've made of my own Gen Z kids are that they're just growing up too fast almost. They're being forced to deal with things earlier in life than we had to as millennials.
Right, because they're helping out at home in those situations where they're multi-generational and they have access to everything. They have access to information that we never had access to.
Sure.
Old souls.
So one area that came up recently in the example, and I think this plays to more of a multi-generation, is Walmart didn't do as well this recently as they have in the past. And there was some debate as to what, using that as an example, but H&M and a few other brands as well. This has been the first time that there's been a lot of news around where inexpensive clothing comes from, and factories overseas and the brands that carry them. And the discussion was around a younger generation coming into more awareness that in order to get those lower brands from overseas, they're made by children overseas.
Yes.
These pictures are relevant. Little younger Generation Z wouldn't quite understand that, but millennials and other generations in the same household that would be talking about that would have a very big impact on a shift on purchasing. And they thought that new awareness was contributing to some of the other impact just in general of where things come from.
Yes.
And who's making them in order for us to get the better deal.
It really does seem to bear out now, where I think people were skeptical. You know, when we started talking about social causes, there was a lot of skepticism around whether or not those beliefs would impact purchase behavior, but the data would suggest, to your point, that it is starting to impact purchase behavior in a pretty major way.
Oh, sorry, he's been raising his hand. You go first.
Oh, thank you.
That's so kind.
That's so polite.
Since I need counsel on this.
How did I not see you?
Starting 2 weeks from today, my home will be inhabited for 8 days by 2 boomers, 2 X's, a millennial, and 2 Z's.
So you know how to deal with them, right?
Do you think our whitewater rafting fund is a good idea? How will that go?
I think you're going to have quite a ride there.
I think it's going to be a very digital week.
They can teach you everything you need to know if that you don't know already about technology, I suppose. Should be interesting. Stacy?
I was going to speak to the gentleman who just talked about that this generation of children are growing up very quickly, because I too have a Z, is that the correct term? I have a Z who's an 8-year-old little girl, and the one thing that I think that is important as marketers for us to recognize too is that this group is so pressured to perform at such a young age, more so than we ever have been in our entire life. I mean, to the point where if you don't have your kid in kitty kid, forget about them playing soccer in 5th grade. I mean, it's just an unbelievable pressure to perform, to be involved. And when it comes to especially high schools and choosing a college, the pressure they put on themselves for SATs, I never remember being that stressed out. So I think too, to some degree, that speaks to the seriousness that you talked about of this group. But I think that the seriousness is a result of competitiveness and that they need to be to survive in the world that they're growing up in.
Mm-hmm.
And is the seriousness more girls than boys?
I haven't seen it. Yeah, I haven't seen anything that differentiates between the two. I've seen it. Yeah.
I think it's millennial parents.
Yeah.
I absolutely do.
It's a combination of millennial parents and then just the reality, just the more realistic viewpoint and being afraid, fear, really, you know, not succeeding. I think we have like time for 2 more questions. So you and then yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. And then we'll finish up with you. Yeah.
I know it's still pretty early on, but you talked about how with Gen Y, there were some things that carried over to Gen Z and kind of amplified, but then there were other things that kind of, you know, Gen Z started doing the exact opposite. I know it's still early on with Gen Alpha, is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah.
What, do you see anything that's going to carry over from Z, or do you think that there are some things, like specific characteristics that you know, but I know it's still...
The only thing that's clear is the technology. Yeah. I mean, that's the only thing, is that, I mean, if you can, I mean, I can't even just, I just can't even imagine, you know, a group that's more tech native than this group. I can't even imagine it, but it's going to happen. So it's going to be very interesting. Other than that, no, I haven't seen any other data that would define alpha just yet. And last question?
I was just going to comment on what you were saying about the factories and the clothing. There was a campaign in Europe where there were vending machines and you had the opportunity to get free t-shirts but you had to watch a video first. And the video displayed what the actual production of the t-shirts looked like. And the percentage of people that did not take the t-shirt was drastic to the ones that did, which showed how awful they were. So I think that speaks like to the value. They love value, but at the same time, they really, really care about the social cause.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you for that. Thank you all so much. What a great group. I had a blast. Hope you did too.